Now, module 3 is where we take those 4 principles of idolatry and see how from the mid-1800s onwards there's been a systematic growth, development, trend and progression into what I am really referring to as the spirit of Antichrist. And there's several different places where you could root this or begin this. I would Frederick Stiller and Schopenhauer is a good place, but I bring it a little bit further forward and take us up into the mid-1800s with Wagner and the production of his Ring cycle of operas. And this whole cycle takes about 15 hours. So this is a very substantial work. And what is so fascinating about Wagner is he is communicating a message, and that message is that the pagan is victorious over the outdated, if you like, bourgeois morality of the Christian past. But he understands that Christian message by now, mid-1800s, this is not a 3rd century gospel now. This is what has developed in the Western world through what I call rational textualism that comes partly from the Reformation and partly from the Enlightenment philosophers, but that truth is propositions. Truth is statements that you ascribe to. And that has begun to shake by the middle of the 1800s. And Wagner communicates his message where the term is used, total art. And so there is dance, there is orchestral music, there is choral music, and there are set designs created in a particular artistic way, and the acoustics. They even actually built a theatre for the first renditions of the Ring because they needed a certain kind of acoustic framework for it. And this adopting of this, what we call multi-sensory hermeneutics, has an enormous impact upon the listener. So ideas that have been communicated through this process of, in the Latin, notitia sensus fiducia, which is, if you like, the elements of the information, intellectual assent, and then yes, I believe it, etc. That now truth is communicated at a multi-sensory level. And Wagner wasn't the first, but he was certainly the first to do it on a scale like he did. And this then begins to see a paroxysm or a release of different creative forces to communicate ideas. You you roll over, I mean, we could talk about Ibsen, and I do a little bit, but in this, but just for this little introduction to where this course will go, we move forward to the end of the First World War, when Europe was exhausted because Christians had their various priests and pastors blessing, pouring holy water and all the rest of it on their guns, and they killed each other. And the outcome was so disastrous that Europe as we knew it collapsed at the end of the First World War. And of course that led into the 1919 Paris Peace Conference, which was the forerunner, was the League of Nations, which then became the forerunner of the United Nations. But the First World War was the end of something and the beginning of something new. And in 1919 in Paris, you had these characters that came together: Diaghilev, Stravinsky, Nijinsky, Debussy, to create a modern art ballet, but with specialized music and painting and gestures and choreographic movement that was designed to state, and this was very clear in terms of the pagan, that it was the victory of paganism against Christianity. And you can read the various articles and books on this subject. But it was, again, like Wagner, it was a total art. So we're, still preaching on the streets, giving the idea that everything is about ideas, and yet the ideas that swept Europe during this time were very anti-Christian ideas and were of the spirit of Antichrist, and were designed to have a multi-century impact. And the work, the great book on this is Modrus Eckstein, The Rites of Spring, that the impact of this total art ballet program really affected art and culture in Europe from that point onwards. So much so that within a very short period of time, the idea of the pagan having victory over Christianity evolves into the Cabaret Voltaire, which was a movement in Zurich. Cabaret Voltaire was like a nightclub, sort of cafe bar, sort of live music spot. But this was the birth of the Dada music movement. And we think of Dada as being connected to Paris, which of course is where it really caught on, but its origins were in Zurich with Cabaret Voltaire. And what this was that everything is absurd, and the universe is absurd, and that art and life needs to be devoted to the destruction of order. It's like, whoa. So we come from Wagner via Nietzsche and a few other places to now the 1930s, late 20s, 1930s, where it's like it's absurd. There is no meaning. There certainly is no truth, but we need to resist order at every level. And you see this then springing up in cultures all over the world onwards, so that in the, in the 1960s, excuse me, Timothy Leary and all of those folks there are rooted in this idea of an absurd universe. But it then rolls over into the Berlin era, or the Weimar era, which is between, really, in effect, 1920 and 1932. 1932 is when the Nazi Party came to, if not total power, certainly in the ascendancy, and everything was changed. But it was a devotion to excess. If you remember, I said right at the very beginning, you got two horses, the rational and the irrational, the wild and the reasonable. Well, this, in Berlin, in those 10 years or so, you saw the most extreme involvement in witchcraft, alcoholism, drug addiction, unbelievable debauched immorality. In fact, really, 1960s London really didn't have much to compare with the degradation of the Weimar movement. And of course, this then led into what I call the Centaur Differambric movement, which is where people are moving more and more towards an animalistic expression. So if you listen to, and I don't suggest you do, but if you listen to Slipknot and there's probably all kinds of new groups out there now, but the heavy metal scene, there is something about that is seeking to somehow combine the human being with the animal, and that's the idea of the centaur in Greek mythology up on Mount Pelion, which is half horse, half man, and so forth. And that centaurism, this merging of the animal and the male, but in expressions of rage, of excess in every aspect of life. And you can see there are aspects of this, but I don't want to speak negatively here, but if you look at the modern day pagan music movement, groups like Faun, it's a restoration of paganism, but it's in a folk rock environment. It's not in a heavy metal environment, because it's designed to draw from a very wide audience, not just those people who want to go off their heads and act like animals half the time and so forth. But then this leads us as if you like, the next stage. I don't know if there's any other stage beyond this, but in the spirit of Antichrist, and that is transhumanism, whereby there is now a hybrid, not of animal and man, but of technology and the human condition, with the idea that the human becomes less necessary. Now, I'm quite transhuman in as much as I got this pacemaker in my heart, and I've got this enormous piece of, I don't know what it is, plastic inside holding my muscles in my stomach and so forth. But we're talking within the transhuman, and that is that the humanity in charge doesn't work. And so therefore, the faster we get into a transhuman condition where there is a hybrid between humanity and the machine, the better it will be for everybody. So this spirit of Antichrist, which then attracts this non-Christian creative spirituality into its flow, ultimately ends up with the loss of the humanity, of actually the loss of personhood. And so in this whole module on the spirit of Antichrist, we look at this subject.